Move along. Thank you. That was my first thing to say, to do, record. We have so many speakers here. I feel a little redundant in saying Green Drinks is part of an international group that was started by a bunch of Brits who were sitting at a bar. And I don't think they were drinking a glass of water with a napkin, a green napkin wrapped around it, but that's what I'm doing. So hence Green and Drinks. We used to have our little gathering at Galuccio's where the wonderful staff there would mix up a cool cocktail for us. But since COVID, we've gone Zoom. And since we seem to have a lot of downstate people, that seems to work really well. We are a nonpartisan educational gathering, and we invite anybody who wishes to explore and share and discuss environmental issues, certainly local issues or national issues. If you help us spread the word, if you go to our Facebook page and like us, that ups the, whatever it is, the algorithm that more people see it. The recordings are gathered very nicely by Dee Durham. I didn't get you to introduce yourself, Dee, I will in a minute. Are found at the Plastic Free Delaware YouTube. And I've been trying to put that on the end of each of the emails that I send out as reminders. We have some wonderful partners in this little project who are the Sierra Club. Several of you guys are members, Delaware chapter, Citizens Climate Lobby. I think a bunch of you guys are members of that as well. Plastic Free Delaware, the Delaware Native Plant Society, and Interfaith Power and Light. As I noted, we're a nonpartisan gathering and we welcome all points of view because environmental stewardship should be, and hopefully is, an issue for all of us. So just so I get my commercial break in here, mark your calendars for May 15th. At this point, Dustin Thompson is going to talk about community solar and how that's advancing in Delaware. There was some interest in that the last time we spoke. So if people have ideas or suggestions for speakers, topics, please let Dee or me know. Dee and I kind of picked up this project after it fell fallow in the northern part of Delaware. Dee, you want to say a little bit about you? I should let you introduce yourself.
I think I know most everyone here, but wear a few hats, including Plastic Free Delaware and Newcastle County Council, which working on Tom, I saw here on some energy related things. And so those are probably the two main things. So I'll be plugging some plastic stuff here in the chat in a second.
So coolio, we are absolutely delighted to have our two Delaware representatives of offshore wind, Chris Bason and Mike Dunmeyer. I guess I'll start with Mike because you've been in your spot a little bit longer. Mike is a Lewis resident and a Dewey Beach weekender, lifelong Delawarean, has a degree in environmental policy from Duke and an MBA. Did I say that right? An MBA from Duke as well. Did I get that right? Did I mess that up?
MBA from Duke, no environmental policy. I'm making it up where that's concerned.
Oh, okay. You're just making it up. There you go. Fabulous. And is the offshore wind representative for community partners with US Wind. Chris Bason recently joined Orsted, I think last October, also a Delawarean, I believe from Newcastle County and now lives in Sussex County. Previously was the director for the Center for Inland Bays and has a bachelor's degree from a well-known university, Delaware, in agriculture and a master's degree in biology from East Carolina University. I'm interested to note that you also worked at the Nature Conservancy, who has been our speaker a couple of times ago. So I'll let you guys kind of manage how you want to do this. If who wants to start, Chris or Mike? Who would like to start? You want to kick it off, Mike?
I'm happy to, unless Chris, would you rather jump in and go first?
Mike, why don't you go ahead? You warm it up, and if you forget anything, I'll pick it up after you.
All
Come
right.
on, rock, paper, scissors. Let's go.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen then. Let's see. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. Can you see a US Wind branded PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight. Thanks, Jill and Dee, for pulling this together as always. When Jill asked me if I would do a project update, I thought, oh, well, let me see what else I need to add into this, because I feel like it was just a short while ago that I gave a project update on green drinks. And I checked my notes, and that was almost 2 years ago, which shows you how quickly time does fly. So I wound up, I've got a hybrid here. We'll give a good project update, but I also did want to share just a small piece of what we talked about at the symposium the folks from Power pulled together last week, and touch on some of those issues as well. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, my company, US Wind, holds the rights to a lease area that comes as far north as the Fenwick Island latitudes and then extends southeasterly along the Maryland coast. We've won 2 awards that enable us to develop about 1,100 megawatts of offshore wind. And that's enough power for 340,000 area homes. And we can deliver that with 76 turbines and 3 offshore substations. And if nothing else changes through the permitting process, what you see on this map, the array of those little dots representing turbines, that's what we would use to deliver this energy. And in this map, the closest turbine to Fenwick Island is a little over 15 miles, 17 miles to Bethany, 24 to Dewey, 26 to Rehoboth, and over 30 to where I live in Lewis. You'll also notice on this chart that there's a big empty area in the northwest section of the lease area, and that represents our excess capacity. We've got room for about another 38 turbines in there, so roughly 700 megawatts. And we don't have any awards today that would allow us to develop that area. But if opportunities arose in the future, either an additional award from Maryland, or if Delaware were to pursue a program, then we would certainly compete. So it's quite possible that that area would be filled up as well at some point. So US Wind has been working on its construction and operations plan, also known as the COP, for a long, long time. And this is a series of documents that goes into great detail about really every aspect of the project, from design of the components, construction, how they'll be shipped out to the lease area, installation, operations and maintenance over the life of the wind farm, and ultimately decommissioning at end of life, which could be 35, 40 years or so into the future, where we will remove everything from the ocean. And fortunately, just about everything now can be recycled. Over 90% of the components can, including the blades now. So very little goes into a landfill. Now the COP, in addition to going into all these details, it also lays out all of the risks that we will encounter through our activities. And importantly, all the things that we'll do to either avoid or mitigate those risks. And it lays out all of the research we've either conducted ourselves or have consulted in the process of developing these documents and learning what we need to know about that lease area to develop and operate it safely and responsibly. June of last year, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, also known as BOEM, who's our lead regulator, declared the COP to be sufficient and complete. And now this does not mean that it's been approved. It means that they've looked at it thoroughly and they've decided that all the information that they need to make an approval decision is in those documents now. And so, they're good from their perspective. And when they made that decision, 2 things happened. The first is that the documents became public on boem.gov. And I would encourage all of you who are interested to go and take a look. They're very transparent, and you can really learn just about anything you could possibly want to learn about the project by looking at them. The other thing is that it kicked off the final 2 years of what is a robust, rigorous permitting process for offshore wind. And at that point in time, there were a series of public hearings called where people could ask questions, register their opinion at the outset of this process. Later this summer, BOEM will likely come out with its draft environmental impact statement document, which is our first view of what they think of our plans. And there will be another round of hearings when that happens. So again, another opportunity for folks to comment, to ask questions, to find out more, and to register their opinion. If things proceed according to plan, it'll be 2024 around the summertime when BOEM would come out with its final environmental impact statement, where they will make their decision to approve with conditions or deny the application that we've put in. Like I say, that kind of covers the process. 2024 is when that approval could come. And at that point, if we do get the positive decision, we would be able to begin construction. On this slide, a couple things I wanted to walk you guys through. The first is to just familiarize you with this concept of a project design envelope, and then talk a bit about landfall and connection to the grid. So the project design envelope is a concept that BOEM uses that recognizes that the offshore wind development process is very lengthy. And over that time, technology can evolve and change. And through the research that you continue to do, you may learn new things that make one decision look better than another at a certain point in time. And so they allow us flexibility to propose a couple alternatives in some areas, and they will essentially evaluate all of those alternatives. In this proposal, some of the things that are major issues that you should be aware of. So as I mentioned at the outset, we only have awards that enable us to develop about 2/3 of the lease area, but in our COP, we are seeking to permit the entire lease area, which could be as many as 121 turbines and 4 offshore substations. And we're taking this route because should the opportunity arise to compete for future awards, the government will have already had the opportunity to evaluate our project at its greatest potential impact, so we'll know if we can actually compete effectively for those future awards. The other couple issues that are important to note in terms of the PDE, we have used as our design basis, beginning with the award process from the Maryland Public Service Commission, an existing turbine from GE that is 14.7 megawatts and would stand 817 feet above the mean water line out in the lease area. We have also included for BOEM's evaluation what is now a turbine that only exists in the design phase. It's a 18 megawatt turbine that would be 938 feet above the mean water line out in the lease area. We are constrained by what we put into the COP. So at the end of the day, it will be one of these 2 turbines. If in 2024, there's a 25 megawatt turbine available that's 1,200 feet tall, we couldn't use it because it's not in the COP. So at the end of the day, it'll be one of these options. And we have proposed in this COP 2 potential points of landfall, both in Sussex County, and 3 potential points of interconnection. One in Dagsboro, adjacent to the Indian River Power Plant that'll be coming offline around the time our power will be coming online. One in Cool Spring and one in Milford. And from each one of the points of landfall, we've identified a few different prospective cable corridors that would take you from one of those 2 points of landfall out to one or more of those prospective points of interconnection where we'll actually connect to the grid. We've identified to BOEM our preferred path would be to make landfall at 3 R's Beach, which is just south of Indian River Inlet, continue to bury our cables underneath the bay bottom going across Indian River Bay, and connect up to the substation that is adjacent to the power plant there at Dagsboro at the west end of Indian River Bay. We believe that this would be far and away the least disruptive course that we could take for folks in the area. And that particular point of interconnection has been identified not only by US Wind, but also through studies done by government and academia as really the best point to connect to on the peninsula, in large part because there's already a major power plant connected to it that's coming offline. Now, as we do this work, it's important to note that the cables will be buried all the way from where they begin offshore at the wind farm to where they ultimately connect at one of those 3 existing inland substations. There will be no above ground infrastructure between those 2 points. And as we do this, we'll use a low impact trenching method to bury the cables beneath the seabed. until we get to about 1,000 feet from shore. At that point, we'll switch to horizontal directional drilling, which will enable us to send the cables about 60 feet beneath the beach and dune without coming into contact with those ecosystems at all, so that we don't have to have any disturbance of those sensitive areas. We would also use that horizontal directional drilling approach to go underneath of any wetlands areas on the east and west ends of Indian River Bay, again, so that we don't disturb that critical habitat. And as we get into questions, we can certainly explore any areas that you guys are interested in terms of impact on wildlife. But just to make the point at the outset, US Wind has been studying this area since we acquired the lease in 2014. We also have 30 years of European experience with this technology to look back on. And if you look at the COP, you'll see a lot of European studies have been cited there. So we understand this area very well, and we are confident that we can develop and operate safely with negligible to no negative impact on the local ecosystem and its wildlife. And the COP, of course, lays out all of these issues and how we will address them. And this is where I wanted to veer off because, as I say, there are a lot of different things that we can talk about, but there has been one issue that's been in the news a lot lately, so I wanted to address it here. And that's that we've had this recent spate of very unfortunate whale strandings. And there's a lot of misinformation that's out there, typically opposition groups that are looking to find anything to beat back offshore wind. They're trying to align these tragic strandings with offshore wind development activities. And I'm here to say that there is no connection at all between these strandings and offshore wind development. As I say this, there are three concepts that I want you guys to know about and understand. And the first is that while these strandings are absolutely tragic, they are unfortunately not unique. If you look at this little chart on the left, the smallest bar there is to the right. That represents the 15 strandings we've experienced in 2023. And you can see that going back a few years, we've had years with many, many more than this. And in fact, going back to 2007, we averaged 52 whale strandings per year along the East Coast. And we've had 15 so far this year. So again, it's horrifying. But it is, again, not unique. And as this became an issue in the news, all of the agencies that have subject matter expertise in this area, NOAA, NOAA Fisheries, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the Marine Mammal Commission, a number of very well-educated environmental NGOs, all came out and looked at the facts that there is no connection between whale strandings and offshore wind development activities. And a number of these press releases that came out announcing this also took the time to note that historically, we know that that whale strandings are typically caused by ship strikes and gear entanglements. And in fact, the three necropsies that have come back thus far on the 15 strandings that have happened in this year have all identified ship strikes as the cause of death. So again, unfortunate, but we know what typically is the cause. And I often will have people remark to me when I say this that, yeah, Mike, but aren't seismic air guns really problematic for whales? And aren't they really loud? And yes, they are. They are significantly louder than the technology that we use, and the sound doesn't dissipate very quickly. But just so that everyone's clear, offshore wind surveys do not use seismic air guns. That's needed in the oil and gas industry because they're looking to find oil and gas deposits that are, hundreds of meters deep beneath the seabed. We really just need a picture of the seabed and need to know what's a few feet beneath it. So obviously we don't need that level of equipment. What we do is quite different. So to just talk about that for a minute, to begin with, LFCs are low frequency cetaceans. These are the baleen whales, the large whales like humpbacks, North Atlantic right whales, sei whales, blanking now, but the whales that we typically are hearing about and are concerned about on the East Coast here. They're called low frequency cetaceans based upon the hearing range that they've evolved to hear within. And any sounds in that frequency that are above 160 decibels can be problematic. Between about 160 to 180, it would produce a behavioral change, which is typically avoidance. The whale will simply move away. above 183 or so, and there can be some actual harm. And the good news is that the great majority of technology that offshore wind companies use in their surveys operates at frequencies that are beyond that which low frequency cetaceans have evolved to be able to pick up on. So it would be the same as someone standing next to me blowing a dog whistle. It wouldn't matter how loud they blew it. I wouldn't respond to it because I have not evolved to hear those frequencies. Again, the whales have not evolved to hear the frequencies that most of our equipment operates at. But there are two forms that are within that frequency range. They're the shallow and medium penetration sub-bottom profilers. And here, the good news on these is that the sound dissipates very, very quickly. At its source, right where the equipment is, it is above 160 decibels and therefore could be problematic for these animals. But if you look at that chart down on the bottom, the shallow penetration sub-bottom profiler dissipates to under 160 decibels within a half a meter, so almost immediately. And the medium penetration sub-bottom profilers dissipate beneath 160 decibels within about 33 meters. And when we do these surveys, every survey vessel is accompanied by a NOAA-trained and certified independent protected species observer. Their job is, for an hour before anything begins, they have to certify that an exclusion zone is clear of all marine mammals. And the exclusion zones we use are 500 meters beyond where the survey is taking place for North Atlantic right whales. We're extremely cautious because, of course, they're an endangered species, and 100 meters for all other cetaceans and marine mammals. Since the sound is dissipating to beneath 160 decibels within about a third of that range, and because we've got certified protected species observers always making sure that the area is clear of marine mammals, the risk is quite low. If in fact a marine mammal were to wander into the exclusion zone during this process, everything would shut down immediately and there would be no sound until the protected species observers had certified that that animal had left the exclusion zone and the survey was safe to begin again. So we can take more questions on that if you're interested, but just want to make sure that everyone is armed with how the stuff actually works. And just to wrap things up and then turn it over to Chris, offshore wind does offer tremendous economic opportunity for Delaware. As I mentioned, we're looking to connect the grid here in Sussex County to make that happen. We're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to strengthen the local grid. By that happening, first of all, Sussex County will get to use the energy because the energy tends to be consumed close to where it's delivered. They'll get a greatly improved infrastructure and they'll get a significant number of electrical worker jobs for a couple of years doing all of this important work. And typically, when a utility takes on this type of infrastructure build out, the cost is passed on to the ratepayer. And in this case, US Wind will be footing the entire bill, and Orsted will be doing the same thing when they operate as well. So Sussex County will get some great benefits. We also, US Wind is going to be here for another 35, 40 years or more. And we believe strongly that if you are a member of a community, you need to do what you can to help it. So we have and will continue to look for good organizations that are doing important work in the community, that are aligned with our brand, that we can support. And we are in conversations with some of the local coastal towns to see if there are things we could do to help them with their priority issues as well. There are a lot of jobs coming out of this project that will accrue in Maryland, but we are going to involve a lot of firms from Delaware in our supply chain as well. And we've done a lot of outreach to groups like Miller Metals, Crystal Steel, Gillespie Precast Concrete. We're also doing a lot of outreach to minority business enterprises in the area, and these will be important players in the work that we do. We are in conversation with some entrepreneurial organizations that are working with local universities like the University of Delaware, Del Tech, and Delaware State, and looking to engage with them and potentially invest in, if not utilize, some ventures that they're looking at launching that will thrive and do good in the area because offshore wind is nearby. And then all of this economic activity also has secondary effects as money spent in state ripples out and creates other jobs as well. So that's my quickie project update and other stuff. This is my contact information, and I'm sure that the folks from Green Drinks can make this available as well. I'm happy to meet anytime, groups, big or small, families, HOAs, civic groups. If you have questions, just give me a shout. I'd love to come out and talk to you. And that's it for me. See if I can find, there's my mouse. Okay. And
Thank
then
you,
share
Mike.
and give it back to the good of the order.
Shall we hold questions until after Chris does his presentation? Chris, you want to kick off?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jill. Can you guys see my presentation okay?
Yeah, we're also seeing the
The
slides
notes.
down the side, so we just want to see the one, I think.
Yep. Okay, let me try that again. Okay, is that better?
That's better. Fab.
Okay. Are you still seeing just the one slide, or do you see the presenter view?
Just the one slide.
Great. All right. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm Chris Bason, and oh gosh, I'm having trouble advancing the slide now. I'm really sorry about this. Here we go. Back on it. I'm the stakeholder relations lead for Orsted. And I think many of you know the company, but for those of you that don't, I'd like to take a little bit to talk about who we are. We're the global leader in offshore wind, and we have 30+ years of experience in the business. Around the world, we have 7.6 gigawatts of installed capacity, and that equals over 1,500 turbines that are spinning in over 28 offshore wind farms. Orsted is very committed to sustainability, and we have science-based net zero greenhouse gas emission target for 2040. So we built the world's first wind farm in Vindby, Denmark in 1991, and we recently decommissioned that wind farm, recycling 98% of its materials. We own and operate the world's largest wind farm at Hornsea 2, which is off the coast of England, and also America's first wind farm, which is the Block Island Farm, which was created in 2016. So Orsted is not only an offshore wind developer, but I'm sorry here, I'm having trouble advancing my slides. Gosh, I really apologize.
Yeah, no problem. I said technology is wonderful, except when it doesn't work.
Yeah, let me see if I can get out of presenter view. That might help.
Chris, would you like if I sang for a while you were working this out?
Thanks for saving me, Mike.
What would you like to sing, Mike?
Well, any requests?
Sea
I mean,
Chanties.
Chris might like it, but none of you would because my singing voice is horrible. But, happy
Don't
to
quit your
pass
day
it
job.
on. Exactly. Well, Charlie, I love your background, and it's given you kind of this halo as well.
Yeah, I'm a space cadet.
Okay,
I
I
thought you
think
were
I'm
more like an angel.
Take it away, Chris.
How we
You're
doing,
You're
Chris?
good.
back in action. Thanks for your patience.
No
So
problem.
as I was saying, we're not just an offshore wind developer, but we're the top five in the top 5 U.S. developers of onshore renewables, onshore wind, solar, and we have a number of storage projects as well. And we're also in the P2X business, where we're creating renewable hydrogen and green fuels. We have a partnership with Maersk, who is a large shipping company, and we're developing a Power2X facility on the Gulf Coast that's going to produce e-methanol for a fleet of 12 methanol-powered vessels that Maersk is producing. This is our footprint in the United States. you can see that offshore we do have the skipjack projects, and then we have 5 other projects that are under development off the coast, and 1 project, the South Fork Wind Project, which is under construction now off the coast of Long Island. And that's about 130 megawatts for that one. Onshore, our work is concentrated in the center of the country where there's a lot of wind. We also have solar, particularly in Texas, when we've got some storage associated with those projects. One project that is just about to get started that's very interesting to me is the Mockingbird Solar Project in East Texas. And this is our first biodiversity project in the United States that will have a net positive biodiversity impact as a result of the project. And with Mockingbird, we worked with the Nature Conservancy to protect a 1,000-acre prairie that was extremely diverse with a lot of floristic diversity. And we were able to buy that and give it to the Nature Conservancy so that they could manage it in perpetuity. So that ambition is something that the company puts a lot of effort in, and by 2030, we will make sure that all of our renewable energy projects will deliver a net positive biodiversity impact. So this goes above and beyond just mitigating any environmental impacts that our projects would have. It would actually leave our project areas better than we found it. And so this graphic here on the right illustrates some of the positive biodiversity impacts that you would expect to see from some of the turbines, where when the turbines hit the bottom of the seafloor, there's structure that is placed around them to hold them in place. And that acts as an aggregator for aquatic life and also has some production value for aquatic life as well. So these things will be great places for folks to go out and fish, and they definitely will do that. Last year, Orsted also signed the National Offshore Wind Project Labor Agreement, which was an agreement with the National Building Trades Association that will ensure that all of the wind farms that we build from Maine to Florida will be constructed by union labor, and that applies to contractors and subcontractors. That means that folks will be earning really good wages for these jobs. There'll be equity and training programs associated with it, as well as diversity targets based on the hours that people are working on the project. So we care about nature, we care about people, and we care about the communities that we operate in. Offshore wind, not just Orsted, but offshore wind overall is reinvesting in America's ports. And we're proud to be doing that here near Delaware in our regional economy. And a great example of that is the Port of Paulsboro, which is just up the river from Delaware. It's basically across from the Philadelphia airport. We have an agreement with EEW, which is a large steel pipe manufacturer, to build the foundations for the turbines that will serve Ocean Wind and Ocean One up at the Port of Paulsboro. And this shows a layout of the facility that's under construction now. These are the monopiles that are driven into the seabed that the turbine towers are inserted into. And we'll be producing up to 125 monopiles here when fully operational. And this facility will be home to over 500 manufacturing jobs. So on to our project. This is the Skipjack Wind lease area located here on your right. This is where we'll be building the Skipjack project. The Skipjack project will be 966 megawatts that will be coming, the power will be coming onshore here in Delaware. And that's enough power to supply 300,000 homes in our region. Right now, we're working on our construction operations plan, and we hope to have that submitted to BOEM in September of 2023. And we are a little bit behind where US Wind is now. So if you see more specificity in Mike's presentation, that's by the nature that US Wind has already submitted their plan. Most of our turbines in this lease area are going to be located in the western and southern part, and there will be some open area as well. And we plan to put anywhere from 50 to 71 turbines in that area with 2 offshore substations. The nearest turbine will be maybe 15, 16 miles from the coast. And from Fenwick Island, for example, it's about 20 miles away. So where have we been with this project? We started off with a project that was 120 megawatts, and that was from our first award from Maryland of offshore renewable energy credits. And our agreements with Maryland allow us to construct this project, and they buy the credits from us. And then our project greatly increased in size when we won a second bid to Maryland in 2021. And that was another 846 megawatts, which takes us up to the total that we're at today. In 2021, we were doing a lot of work on that bid, putting the project back together as a much larger project. And in 2022, we were doing a lot of offshore surveys. And now we've started onshore investigations to support our transmission route. And we're looking at a number of different transmission alternatives. So I wanted to share with you, Mike talked about this a little bit, but how it works to get the power from the farm onshore. Each turbine is a generator, and there's cables that run down the tower of the turbine that are buried under the bottom of the seabed. And that network of array cables goes to the offshore substations where the power is stepped up so that it can be transported quickly through high voltage export cables to an onshore substation. So from that onshore substation, which we will create, we will take the power to another existing substation, and from there, it will be transmitted to our homes and our businesses. So the project is going to have a number of important economic benefits to Delaware, and those are mostly going to be centered around the construction of our offshore export cable, or excuse me, our onshore export cable, our large electrical substation, and the transmission upgrades that we'll be doing on the grid in Delaware. And we have valued those upgrades to $432 million of added value to the Delaware economy, which will support over 200 direct full-time equivalent employments. And we feel very confident there will be additional significant direct and indirect employment associated with that work in Delaware. And of course, that will be all union labor under a project labor agreement that is constructed locally. We'll also have tremendous climate benefits with the project, with over 38 million short tons of CO2 reduced as a result of our wind farm, and over 30,000 short tons of air pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter reduced. Now, those benefits for the CO2 are going to accrue globally, but we will also experience those benefits here in Delaware, as will the benefits for air pollution be concentrated in Maryland and Delaware. And the way that this works is when you have new renewable energy coming online, it's very low cost, and over time it acts to outcompete the dirtier, more expensive fossil fuel generation sources that are currently supplying almost all of Delaware's power. The energy infrastructure benefits, as Mike pointed out, we will also be providing them to the state. We'll have over 12 transmission network upgrades, and that will be valued at $150 million. You can see where some of those upgrades will occur. There are the increasing the size of overhead transmission lines, upgrading substations as well. And that $150 million does not include the value of the substation that we will create just for our project alone. So when you upgrade the grid and you bring in a whole lot of new low-cost power, that can drive down ratepayer rates, and we've projected estimated ratepayer savings of $210 million over 20 years through a 3.6% estimated market price depression. A lot goes into those projections, but we certainly feel the fundamentals of those projections are solid. So one of our routes that we're looking at intently right now is a landfall at the 3 R's Road at Delaware Seashore State Park, which you can see with the little green star here on the map at the right. We will also propose to put our cables subsurface, and we would run them down Route 1 in the median area there, which is quite large. Then head west on Route 26, also subsurface till we get to the town of Dagsboro. Then head north till we find a property that we will build a substation on here near the Indian River generating station. So this is one of the transmission routes that we're investigating now. We have other points of interconnect that we're looking at, another one that's up in the Cool Spring area as well. And we're just not here or there yet on making any decisions. So I want to be clear about that we haven't decided exactly which ones we'll be putting in our COP just yet. So this is the 3R's landfall location here. It's fairly undeveloped beach parking lot. It gives beach access for drive on and walk on access. And this is essentially what our interconnect bay would look like, where the onshore cables come into the area and connect with the offshore cables. And there's just an underground vault that you see here where the connections are. And when the work is done, the area is restored to its previous use or better. And there's just a few manhole covers that you can access the vault. That's very safe. So very low impact to that area. Along the transmission route, this is what some of the work looked like up in Block Island. This is an underground duct bank at the left. The power cables are encased in cement and buried under the roadway. And then the roadway is restored to its post-construction condition. And this is what it looks like here on the right. And so all of the work that we would do would be done to disrupt any traffic disruption or be done to minimize any traffic disruption in the area. And that's the update. I'm happy to take any questions as well, and I will pass it back to Jill.
Okay, thank you, guys. This is just fascinating to see how this works. And I've heard bits and pieces and all of it all together, and I still am just wide-eyed and amazed at the complexity that goes into these things and the assurances for the well-being of our environment as you guys go along. So opening to questions, probably, I guess, raise your hand and either Dee or I will call on you. Eric, unmute with a question. Boy, he's been waiting on that question. Boom.
Thanks for a great presentation. You mentioned that you could power about 300,000 homes, but can you talk a little bit about the duty cycle? Because when there's not wind, then there's no power, right? So how does that work out? It's equivalent to a full-time use of 300,000 homes, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I guess the first part of the answer to that is I think about, you know, how often the wind turbines are spinning in it, kind of its most basic sense. And so we've done some estimates, and it looks like ours will be spinning about 93-94% of the time, which is great. And I think it's a surprise to a lot of people because most of us are more familiar with onshore wind, and onshore wind turbines, depending on where they're located, they tend to spin a lot less. And you often see like offshore wind turbines just kind of, or onshore wind turbines just kind of like sitting there.
Right.
But out in the ocean, it's, you know, the average wind speed out there is over 20 miles per hour. And, you know, it relates to me because whenever I go down that dune in Lewis, especially in the spring, you know, you go down on that beach and it's like, oh my gosh, it's always super windy out there. And so being 15 miles out, there's tremendous wind resources out there, and the turbine blades are going to be very tall. So they'll reach up to where it's even windier, and that's how they're able to do it. In terms of, you know, being able to power 300,000 homes, that's sort of a wide, high scale projection there to give you an idea of like, what does this power mean? So it's a gigawatt it's very large amount of power. It's tremendous. It'll be like, you know, maybe the third largest generator of electricity in Delaware once it hooks up. You know, US winds will be a little bit larger, but just trying to scale it for you. Another way to scale it is if you think about the Indian River coal-fired plant, that has a capacity of like around 400 megawatts. So this is even double that. So a huge amount of renewable electricity coming to shore.
Well, that's great, because I guess I've often heard that wind really only operates 15 to 20% of the time, but that doesn't seem to be the case for offshore wind.
Yeah, that's it makes sense because, when, like, if I think about Lewis and I see the turbine in Lewis, even sometimes there's a breeze and it may not be spinning, and, of course they have to be serviced, but yeah, the capacity out there for wind turbines is really great offshore.
Thank you.
Mike, do you want to add to that?
I think Chris did a great job. I guess I'll just throw in there that, yeah, that below a certain level, the wind blowing at a certain speed, they're not going to operate, but it's a pretty low threshold. It's about 8 miles per hour and above it's going to operate. And then I believe it's above 75 miles per hour that it'll shut down to protect itself. So within that band, it's going to be operating just fine. And as Chris mentioned, the average wind speeds out in those areas, 20, 25 miles per hour, they're very consistent. And on those rare occasions when the wind farms are not producing, I mean, right now, Delaware is importing about 90% of its power. It's mostly gas-fired power coming down from Pennsylvania. It comes down a corridor that roughly parallels Route 1. We're a part of a 14-state grid managed by PJM, and PJM's job is to match supply with demand across these 14 states. Right now, we're not getting any help from off the coast, but you'll have 2 gigawatts between US Wind and Orsted's projects coming in there. That'll make things a lot easier, and Delaware won't have to be importing as much energy as it is right now because of what the wind farms will be delivering. But when they aren't, it'll just work the way that it does today, that the PJM will send more of the power that's coming down the road from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. So that 2 gigawatts is what percentage of Delaware's needs when that all comes together?
Where's Willett when you need him?
Oh, never mind. I just thought one was 1/3 and the other was 1/3. I thought so that would be like 2/3 of the power. Charlie Garlow.
I can get a little bit of a better answer for you on that, Joel.
Okay,
I'll look while Charlie goes.
okay. Charlie, you want to unmute?
Yes, I was interested in the bubble curtains. Seems to me I remember hearing something about bubble curtains as a way of minimizing the sound impact from pounding the pylons into the floor of the ocean. How does that work? How well is it working? Are we making improvements in that to reduce the sound impact from construction?
Yeah. So what Charlie's talking about is the biggest sound producing event for a wind farm is when we're pile driving the monopiles foundations into the seafloor. That does produce large sound, and there are a number of mitigating actions that all developers will take. US Wind is, first of all, we're only going to be installing those monopiles during the months of the year when the large whales and other marine mammals are least likely to be in the area. Again, the vessels will have protected species observers that will be enforcing a very large clearance zone and shutdown zone, similar to how the surveys works, but again, a larger area with even more technology to make sure that it's secure. But what Charlie's talking about is there are devices that we can use for sound attenuation. One of the things that we plan to do is use actual physical sheaths around the monopile and pile driving activity that will restrain some of the sound from getting out. The other thing outside of that are double bubble curtains, which are, if you've seen a fish tank where you've got a bubble around the bottom, it's not too much more complicated than that, but it's a much thicker curtain of bubbles, and that also will reduce sound. And our expectation is that we will get between a 10 and 20 decibel sound reduction through these technologies. We aim to get close to 20, but I think a minimum of 10. And again, the entire concept of those clearance zones and shutdown zones takes into account the amount of energy used in the pile driving, the modeled sound that will come from that, and the sound dampening that we would use as a part of that process.
Thank you. John Irwin, I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I wanted to ask whether you guys, your companies, have any plans to sort of have a marketing effort in response to the misinformation that is being put out by the opposition. The opposition compared to the advocates is formidable, but you guys are way scale, orders of magnitude more resources than Caesar Rodney Institute, So I'm just wondering, given that you seem to have really pretty good answers for all the kinds of things that people are raising, that a public relations campaign could be a big help for responding to the kind of nonsense that we're struggling against. So I just want to know if that's something that you're already doing, or whether it's you think there's reasons you can't do it, that it's sort of you're not allowed to do it. But just any thoughts on that?
Chris, do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and it's a great question. And for me, the issue with the whales was a really interesting learning experience. And I think the first thing I learned is I was just so alarmed with how fast the misinformation spread and was adopted. And the second thing I learned was just how successful I think the industry was with all of its partners as a whole, from government to advocates, to combat that misinformation successfully and redirect the narrative to the facts. And we watched that happen over a period of a few months. And people really just stood up and took ownership of that. Retired professors like this Bradley Steven from, University of Maryland. He was a retired cetacean biologist, and Peggy and everybody really put pen to paper and got out there, and I felt really cleared up and educated people about whales. And so I think there was a bit of a silver lining there, is that we learned a lot about humpbacks. We learned like there's a big and growing humpback whale population, and that there's a big and growing ship population, right? And so for me, it was, me and Mike are constantly doing it. We're out there all the time, and there's a me and Mike in every other market right around up and down the coast, and they do it through these type of interactions, these type of personal meetings, and that's, I think, where we're very effective. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you on that one.
Yeah, I guess to pick up on that, each company does have a multi-tiered communication plan, and some things speak to, I think, the bad news travels fast concept, because Chris raised the issue of whales, and well, of course, immediately, every credible journalistic piece came out about this would put the other side's arguments out there, but tamp it back with a discussion of what the science was saying, what the subject matter experts were saying. Industry groups were speaking out on this, but I think the opposition's points may have been heard more for a longer period, because I think there's just a tendency perhaps for people to anchor on the angry side maybe. But efforts are made there, and not just on an issue by issue basis, but from billboards, radio, digital, geo-centered sorts of things. Both Orsted and US Wind do have ads that are running, things like that. But I think, as Chris mentioned, it's the work that he and I do that is, I think, kind of the tip of the spear on this, where we try to meet with as many people as we possibly can, as many groups. And we'll typically walk into rooms that I think are fairly evenly divided. And what we're trying to do is push back against the misinformation that's out there. And a lot of times I'm not going to change someone's view on offshore wind, but my goal is always, okay, establish your opinion, at least with the facts. If you don't like it, let's make sure you're making that from a credible base of information. But the last thing I would say is that our great hope, and we see this all the time, and we are so thankful, it's folks like yourself that we can educate, and then you guys carry that message forward, the letters to the editor, the supportive calls and letters during the process when BOEM has their public hearings, because there are going to be a lot of people to call into those that'll be angry, that'll be pushing a biased view of things. And so it's important for BOEM to hear that there's another side of the public that believes very strongly in this. So we're all a team working on this together. There are, earned media, paid media, things like that are going on. But it's we as a community that I think can have the greatest impact on this.
I just have to jump in here. Whoopsie, I was talking to somebody about, sorry, the whale issue, and it was just the misinformation, and you're able to say, hey, what you guys just said, there ship strikes, there's net entanglement, not the offshore wind stuff. So, Linda Patton, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very informative. I'm rather new to this, even though I do have someone in the family who is involved with solar power. But I wanted to know if there's any studies or history on what the backup would be if a hurricane came through on the turbines.
Sure. I'll go ahead and kick off on this one. So every wind farm component is designed specifically for the location where it's going to be sited. And we take into account all of the expected weather variables. So you've got this 30-year history in Europe, and a lot of that is in the North Sea, which is not a placid stretch of ocean. And so the earliest turbines have had to stand up to a lot. Now, they don't deal with hurricanes up there. They have very violent storms, but not necessarily hurricanes. So that's something that we have to plan for here. And again, if you look at the data behind this, the latitudes where our wind farms will be, both US Wind and Orsted's, going back to the mid 1800s when we started tracking storms, there have only been 2 hurricanes that when they passed through those zip codes were category 2. There have been none that were category 3 and only a handful that were category 1. Typically, by the time hurricanes get to us, they've weakened to be just a tropical storm. And also with the shape of the coast, how North Carolina comes out like this, most hurricanes, as they get close to us, either veer out further to the east or cut inland. So our area is a little less susceptible to that than some others. But nonetheless, you have to be ready for this. So we're building monopile foundations and charting depths and such so that they should be able to withstand a direct impact from a category 3 hurricane or better. The nacelles, turbine towers, blades, things like that we're looking at are certified to withstand a direct hit from a level 2 category 2 hurricane. Again, we haven't seen direct hits from those in this area ever. When the 2 category 2 hurricanes came through this area, they were very far to the east when they did come through. So we've got that. There is testing that goes on with these things, computer-based model testing with simulated conditions, as well as just standing these guys up and working with them. But our expectation would be that if we took a direct hit from a category 3 hurricane, we would expect that the foundations, the monopile foundations would be fine. The turbine towers would likely be fine. And potential damage to blades or nacelles would be reparable and likely covered by insurance. So it, again, does not appear to be a huge risk. But this is something that we will continue to monitor and learn from as we go forward. Chris?
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. There's a set of international standards that these things have to be built to, and Mike was essentially referring like what those standards are and what they can be built up as. So, I think the risk out there is low now. It could be increasing with climate change as you get rapid intensification or hurricanes near shore. But I think overall the risk is very low relative to other areas, and they're designed to deal with that. And when the winds blow over a certain amount, it's like around 60 miles per hour, the turbines go into this protective mode. They stop spinning and they're angled to reduce damage from the wind. So it's it's definitely something a lot of time and energy is put into.
Thank you.
Good question. Dee, do you have your hand up?
I do. I have 3 questions I'll just throw out there. One is I'm just curious what like PJM and the other power companies that feed Delaware currently, what they think of all this. I was also curious, one of you, and I'm sorry, I forget who, mentioned that that one of your projects had already been decommissioned. I'm just curious if you go back in and rebuild in that same spot, or if not, why not? And it's my third question. I'll think of it. Let me throw those out first.
Yeah, I can start with the decommissioned farm in Vinby. I don't know the answer to that. If another farm was built in place, I suspect not. I'd imagine that farm was much closer to the shore. I think a lot of the earlier farms were. It definitely had much smaller turbines because it was so early. But I'll take a look for that. I'm actually headed to Denmark next week, so I hope to be able to check out some wind farms over there and get you an answer. What was maybe I'll pass it to Mike if Mike, you want to take one of the others?
Sure, and I apologize, Dee. Older guy who's had a lot of head trauma in his life. So can you remind me what your first question was?
I'm in the same boat. I forgot. I remembered my third question, but I was just curious. Maybe it's kind of a stupid question, but like the current power companies, what are they thinking about all this? Do they love you guys, hate you guys? Are they like reacting to get with the program, or what are they doing?
Yeah, so I guess we'll take a step back. So first of all, both of our projects were instigated by the state of Maryland, and the Maryland Public Service Commission, ordered it up. As a result of that, again, taking a step back, how power is delivered and consumed is completely removed from how it is billed for. So the electrons tend to be consumed close to where they're delivered. So here in Delaware, by getting two projects connected up the grid in Sussex County, when we turn on our lights, it's going to be offshore wind energy that's going to be providing that electricity more often than not. But it'll be the Maryland ratepayer that's paying the cost of the electricity because Maryland is the one that effectively commissioned these projects. In time, Delaware may have its own program. Some other things may happen that would change that. And if you're curious, a study was done, and the expectation was that our Momentum project, which is our 800 gigawatt project, was anticipated to add only about 75 cents a month to the average Maryland ratepayer's bill, once all this comes in. So again, competitive with other forms of energy. Having said all this, what I'm building it out to is that right now we aren't really impacting Delmarva Power and Light or any of the co-ops that deliver power in Delaware. Their power purchase agreements will continue to be with who they've done business with in the past. We could have a positive impact on all of the ratepayers in Delaware. I can't guarantee this, but as I mentioned, we import nearly all of our energy, and it all comes down one corridor. Well, just like Route 1 in the summertime, electricity can have congestion issues. And if you look at your bill, it's quite likely you pay a congestion charge, a little surcharge, because there's a loss of energy when that happens. Well, if you're bringing all this energy in from the east, that should go away. Again, we don't control that, so I can't make that promise, but we may see that. And it's Maryland State that negotiated the power purchase agreement with us. Billing the final negotiation of prices and things like that was through them. So it's the state working through their own power providers like BG&E and others. When Delaware is actually buying power from offshore wind is how it will affect the local utilities. And I guess at that point, it'll probably depend on how that compares to what their existing power purchase agreements are from a cost perspective and what other incentives they may have. Big picture, and I apologize, I'm rambling a bit.
Let me ask you this. So you're not expecting to put any coal power plants out of business?
We will in time. And Chris mentioned this, so PJM is managing this 14-state grid with dozens of different energy generating inputs to the grid. 95% of the demand the following day is known. And so 95% is basically priced out ahead of time. And the way PJM determines which energy to use is they stack it cheapest to most expensive in terms of fuel cost. Well, any renewable energy like offshore wind has a $0 fuel cost. So we're always at the top of the stack. in terms of what gets used first. So then if you've met all of your demand before you get down to the most expensive, which is the dirtiest, the older coal plants, in time, those coal plants aren't turning on anymore, so they become decommissioned. And then as more and more renewable energy comes online, you've got more zero cost fuel. So you're starting to get down and satisfying all your demand before you get to some of the gas fired plants and so on and so forth. And so over time, on a continual marginal basis, you are consuming less fossil fuel and ultimately decommissioning plants that are not used enough to be economical. So that absolutely does happen. Delaware, to my knowledge, and Chris, I mean, that coal plant in Millsboro, which is going to come offline in a couple of years, I think that's the only coal plant we've got. And like I say, 90% of what we're using, we're getting from Pennsylvania right now. So the impacts in terms of the fossil fuel plants themselves will probably be out of our area. But what I was going to say, though, is that utilities like DP&L, in addition to providing energy, they have to buy reusable energy credits. Well, Delaware has a renewable portfolio standard requiring that a certain percentage of their energy is delivered through clean energy sources at points in time. And I think it ultimately goes up to 30% by 2035. Right now, Delaware and utilities like DPL are meeting that by buying credits from states that have surpluses. So that's an additional expense that they have. When they've got contracts with offshore wind developers, they'll be getting the energy and the credits. And so that saves them money. So at the end of the day, how they feel about it may be driven in part by economics, but there are two sides of that equation. And I apologize. That was an inefficient way to answer that question.
So my other question was just if either of your companies have looked at the Edgemore site for staging as a staging area and keep those jobs in Delaware.
So U.S. Wind has not, because a part of our agreement with Maryland was to do our marshaling out of Maryland. So at the Sparrows Point area, which is near the Baltimore Harbor, we're also building a steel monopile factory there to replace what was the Bethlehem Steel building. Again, union jobs, just as describing. But if you look at, Willett's made a great case in several papers for that area being used as a marshaling. I think that all of the demand that you've got for offshore wind on the East Coast and the need for marshaling areas, it wouldn't just be our projects that would need that space. There are a lot of area projects that would benefit from that. And I'd be surprised if that didn't happen at some point.
Yeah, I can confirm that. I think that's above the bridge, right?
It is. Yeah.
That kind of limits, how high you can
But
stack.
the site you mentioned is even farther upstream.
Yeah, that's where they're going to make so it won't be like a marshaling and staging and transport port that we'll be using, at least for some of our area, for the ocean wind projects, the New Jersey wind port, for example, which is below the bridge. So
okay.
we stack these components up, and so that's a consideration. But to back up what Mike said is you need a ton of port space to do this, to build this new American industry. I mean, there's so many farms, so many turbines that have to be put in a rapid amount of time. You need a lot of port space. So for those that don't know, the Port of Wilmington is looking for a new operator, and if they haven't already, they're starting work on what's supposed to be a big new container port. And the question is, will offshore wind have a footprint there? And it remains to be seen, but it certainly is a possibility. And I would imagine multiple companies are taking a look as that area kind of develops.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question too. I sometimes feel like we're so provincial. Are there European, like the English have so many offshore wind farms? Is there the same kind of pushback with the view shed and the environmental stuff, or is the US, the East Coast, kind of unique in that?
I think there are viewshed concerns all over the world, I would say. I don't know how they compare to what we're experiencing here. I mean, they've had wind over there for decades, so I could imagine it's not as severe in us dealing with such a new thing over here, but I don't have real specifics on that, Jill. And maybe Mike, you might know a little more.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that culturally, Americans approach things differently than Europeans do. And I think that we tend to be a much more activist populace. So I don't have any experience watching those wind farms be developed in Europe, but just the sheer magnitude of what is there suggests that they ran into less friction than we've seen over here. But as with anything, I think once a few more projects get installed and people see the good and see that the potential downsides were not what they imagined them to be, I think it's going to get a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Who am I missing here?
Question?
Oops, who had a question?
Charlie.
Charlie has a question. If I may, I'll just barrel ahead. Speaking
right
about
in,
provincial, and we don't know what's going on all that well in Europe. How about our nearby neighbors, New Jersey and Maryland and Virginia? I saw in the news something about New Jersey's got to set themselves a new goal of 8.5 gigawatts of offshore wind. Maryland is looking at a larger, maybe it was 7 gigawatts of offshore wind. They're taking on some really aggressive goals. And we, of course, in Delaware, don't have any offshore wind goal yet, although Power and Peggy and all of us are hoping that we can get 800 megawatts, which is about 1/10 of what New Jersey and Maryland and others may be doing or pledging to do. Any hints on how things are going in those states on those goals that they've set?
Yeah, I mean, for Maryland, they are in the process of passing the next round of procurement, and they set the target up to over 8. I think it's like 8.5 gigawatts now.
Right.
And in that bill, there's a huge piece of it that's devoted to transmission and doing a study to figure out how they will get that power on to shore, which is a real big challenge for renewables overall. So a very forward-looking bill, a new governor over there that is recommitted and upping the commitment to offshore wind. So really fantastic from Maryland, and Orsted, of course, supported that bill. And it'll provide new opportunities for not just us, but other offshore wind developers. And Jersey has a really strong commitment too. And I guess it remains to be seen on where Delaware is going to go. But Willett Kempton always says, to meet our renewable energy goals here in Delaware, wind is our biggest resource. It's super abundant, and so I think that's personally exciting to me.
Thanks.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything about that, Mike?
I think Chris did a great job covering that.
Yeah. And Mark, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Chris and Mike to speculate a bit or enlighten us. What are the possibilities that the excess capacity available to U.S. wind and skipjack wind, which I guess a total of about 800 megawatts, could eventually make its way to Delaware?
I can tell you, Mark, for us, we don't have any plans right now. We're not looking at that excess capacity for this project. And I think, there are issues of scale in terms of where we're looking to invest as a company, not just in North America, but globally. So I think that does play into any decision. Things are changing, right? Like BOEM is taking a look at new central Atlantic wind energy areas, and that that could change what is available in total and how that gets developed. But right now, no plans for Orsted.
Yep. And Mark, I would just say that US Wind certainly does want to build out the full lease area. And we do have about 700 megawatts of excess capacity there, but with Maryland just passing what they called it the Power Act. I think they were naming it after Peggy's group. But again, that seeks to quadruple what their energy demand was. So they may get a new bidding process out before Delaware can. So I guess I'd just say that, Delaware needs to have a little bit of urgency, unfortunately. But having said that, Chris mentioned the Central Atlantic planning areas, which are further east that are being developed. So if for some reason Delaware were to miss on our excess capacity, there are other offshore areas that are going to come up and be leased and new opportunities.
Well, thank you for mentioning about the urgency. I know Peggy appreciates that very much.
Peggy, you have your hand up. You want to say something?
Yeah, it's actually just the question I wrote in chat that, our wonderful guests have shared the job situation that would be come to in terms of Delaware workers, and that's really cool, but we wouldn't have any offshore wind support facilities built to support Maryland projects here. And I mean, isn't that true? And so I think the impetus for us to have a Delaware project still it remains very high and important, right?
Yeah, Peggy, that's right. Most of our effort is for manufacturing is focused on Delaware. I mean, we're operating in a regional economy, so there is some benefit to Delaware. I think Mike had mentioned Crystal Steel. Crystal Steel has got a plant in Federalsburg, and that's just over the line from Delaware, right? So it's not far from Seaford at all. But it's there that we'll be manufacturing components like the ladders and the grates that go around the bottom of the turbines and the ship docking structures. And so a lot of those workers that work in Federalsburg likely live over in Delaware. So there's a bit of a shared economy there. Same thing with Paulsboro. There's probably going to be, although New Jersey might not like this, there's going to be some leakage out of that economy that'll come into Delaware. But I agree with you, Peggy. Like that's the point. Like that's one of the real big benefits of doing these procurements, if a state so chooses, is they can get that local manufacturing content, long-term, good paying jobs for the new American industry. And, I think, most Delawareans just see the potential. They see it. It's very clear.
It is worth noting that the Sussex County Economic Development Action Committee, CDAC, has endorsed offshore wind as a job driver for the area, just based upon what is already going to happen, with the projects to date, as well as the potential upside. And both Orsted and US Wind will have operations and maintenance facilities in Ocean City. Of course, the training to do that work and people to staff it could come from Delaware. That's not too far away. And one of the projects that we've been looking at is a partnership between the University of Delaware and Deltech to create an offshore wind training center here in Sussex County. So that gives some jobs to support, run, and market that facility. And it also offers an opportunity for local people to become trained to be able to do that offshore work that they could then do, working out of Ocean City or working out of New Jersey, and perhaps ultimately working out of Delaware as well. And the last thing I would say that, again, is independent of developers is that concept of a marshaling port. A large port area, perhaps in the Delaware Bay, could be a huge opportunity. Again, Delaware wouldn't need a procurement program to make that happen. It could just be an opportunistic, a great location central to a lot of potential lease areas where that work could get done. So there's possibilities, but obviously, Peggy, as you know, everything gets ramped up if the state itself is driving the procurement process and can make the rules for how things need to get done.
Thank you. Who was Frank Burns? You have your hand up?
Yes, yes. So I have a couple questions about sort of congestion and capacity at the landing point at 3 Hours Beach, right? How close is that coming to where new projects aren't going to be able to land there anymore? And also with these two projects, presumably connecting to the grid somewhere down around the Indian River Power Plant, is there going to be the ability to bring in more power through that site? And those are my questions.
Yeah, and not being an electrical engineer, I can't give a incredibly detailed analysis here, but you could certainly build out and attach more power to that particular area, to the substation that exists by the Dagsboro power plant. We would be building two substations just adjacent to that substation that our projects would connect to, and then our substation would bridge directly across to the existing substation and thus getting it to the grid. I would guess Orsted is looking at similar sorts of things. Now, at some point, it's good and healthy to have your generation and connection distributed a little bit more. So you may not want to have every project in the world connecting up there, and that would likely not happen. There is some functional limit. I'm pretty confident that both our project and Orsted's could coexist there. In terms of the paths that we would take, we could both land at 3 Rs, but we probably both couldn't take the same path because there are physical limits to how many cables you can move through a certain area. But the connection point itself could support, at least our two projects. And then as Chris mentioned, the Maryland bill looks into really kind of how this generating capacity ultimately connects, because not just our two projects, there are 33 offshore wind projects in some form of approval between Maine and North Carolina. And that's a lot of energy. That's 30 gigawatts that's coming online. So broadly, the grid managers like PJM do need to start to work with the regional areas to come up with a efficient, effective way to manage all this power that's coming online.
Yeah, Mike said it really well. For our two projects, there's probably enough space there at 3 Rs if we both ended up going to that spot. If you wanted to expand it, you're probably getting into sensitive habitat issues there. There is the Bethany Beach firefly in that area, so that's something that we have to be very careful about. But there are other areas that we're looking at to interconnect, like up in the Cool Spring area. So we may or may not arrive at Indian River. And then, as Mike says, long term, Maryland, I think, is on point with trying to get a transmission study done.
Shall we do one more question? And I think, John, that's you.
Yeah, I guess one thing I was noticing is that in Europe, it seems like I was looking at one of Orsted's plants is like 55 miles out from the shore. I think that's the biggest one out there, 1.2 gigabytes or something.
Yeah, that's probably Hornsea, one of the Hornsea ones. Yeah, a lot of them are pretty far off, so the view shed's less of a concern to those particular communities. But then when you go in Denmark, and I know Peggy's been there, they got little farms like right there, like right off shore. It's kind of more like the Block Island situation.
So in Delaware, is it, we're looking at things that are between 10 and 30 miles out, I guess, in your first areas, and then there's some farther out. So is that to say that it's not that big a deal that the other ones are farther to the east, that there's not a problem with moving the power, it sounds like, because, the distance is already, it seems like in Europe, you're already doing things that are that far away from the shore without a problem. So is it fairly, is it going to be a significant pricing change when you go farther east from like where you guys are to the next group of areas?
So one of the things that makes the East Coast a really great place to develop offshore wind is the continental shelf extends out a long way, which means we can go out a pretty good distance and still be in relatively shallow water. The Central Atlantic planning areas, some of those are still in areas where you could use fixed bottom offshore wind, like what we were talking about, but a lot of that area would need to utilize floating offshore wind, which is a technology that's, in its more nascent stages and has some work to do to come up to the capacity efficiencies that we would have with fixed bottom. Certainly, as you have to run more miles of cable and utilize new technologies and even be installing in slightly deeper areas, it does add to the costs. But spread over, many turbines, many megawatts, again, the law of large numbers is not going to be too bad. I don't know if it's an unasked question, but the federal government cites the lease areas. And when they do that, they try to find areas that are relative deserts of activity. So they start with a very large call area where they presume offshore wind can be developed. They then go through a process to determine if any areas within that large area are critical habitat for threatened or endangered species. If they are, they eliminate those areas. They then do stakeholder conflict avoidance. So shipping, commercial fishing, other ocean user perspectives are taken into account. Problematic areas that conflict with those uses are also eliminated. And what you're left with is where there's less activity, less fishing, things like that. Our areas are, I think, viewed by some as relatively close. When you compare to even in the US, we've got some areas that are beyond 20 miles offshore, but they were cited in those areas for a reason. The areas that are immediately east of us are shipping areas, as well as high value fisheries. So the Central Atlantic planning areas go much further east, which perhaps at that time would have been looked at as too difficult to execute. But as technology evolves, well, now you can perhaps take advantage of that. I think as we see floating wind develop, you'll see areas further and further offshore become feasible.
I don't know if you wanted to stop here, Jill. I had another question, but
Did you have another question?
yeah, I guess one thing was, if you talk about Maryland, New Jersey, you said 8 and 7, that's 15, and we're having a goal of 30, I think the president was saying. And if you've got 33 other projects in the works, are we going to just blow way past that 30 gig goal?
In a good world, we will, but there are a number of bottlenecks that we've got to be able to resolve to get to that. One of which is port space. You need a lot of marshaling area to be able to lay out all of the components and be able to put them on barges or installation vessels efficiently and get them out efficiently to the vessels doing the work on site. You also need a U.S. supply chain of components. And you're seeing more and more of this capital invested here, but early nacelles, blades, and things like that are still going to be sourced from Europe. Europe and the Far East have their own aggressive offshore wind goals, and their own manufacturers will really be tied into meeting those. So we need to bring more of that industry here to the States to be able to reach that. So right now, with nothing changing, we can probably deliver about half of that 30 gig goal by 2030. To reach it, we're going to need more investment in ports, in manufacturing infrastructure, because as you point out, John, we've got a good 60 gigawatts that's effectively identified. It just needs a path to success.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for all your wonderful questions. Dee, do you want to say out loud what you put in the chat so everybody gets to see that, is aware of that, your styrofoam?
Oh, yeah, I just,
Please.
if everyone hasn't yet, if you could take action or feel free to send a custom brief email to anyone in the House. If you feel free to email me if you need that list, but we need all the help we can get to have the not styrofoam, the expanded polystyrene foam bill get through the House. So would love to have everyone's help. And earlier I put in the chat about our in-person green drinks event with Charlie's Downstate group on the 26th at Dogfish. So come get some good beer, learn about dogfish sustainability initiatives, and I'll be there to talk plastic pollution.
Fabulous. Guys, thank you, Mike and Chris. You are wonderful. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your advocacy. Shout out to everybody who's involved with power and pushing Delaware into the, it seems like the 19th century, not even the 21st century. So thank you all. Please put on your calendars, Dustin, for May 15th, next Green Drinks. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your good questions. And thank you again, US Wind and Orsted. And thank you for recording, Dee.
Thanks,
All right,
Chris, and
good night.
Mike. Good night.
Night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Guys, thank you
Bye.
so much.